Hey, welcome. I'm Kath Nolan, once high-performing perfectionist good girl turned goddess of balance, kicking even bigger goals. This is the podcast where we make balance doable for busy, overstretched working women, embracing your voice, honoring your feminine power, and protecting your energy. This allows you to truly step into greatness for the sake of all you hold dear. This is balance, and I am so glad you are here claiming balance for yourself. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. I guess by way of introduction, so the way that I came across you, so I coach humans who are determined to be better, to do better, to, they think they need to be less lazy, they need to, be better at work, better in life. This is my world, right? Helping people to fight against themselves, fight against themselves less in order to be more of who they want to be. And then I stumbled across you. And this idea that actually you opened my eyes to the idea that our bodies are doing some of this blocking as well. So there's things that get in our way, like there's mental blockers and there's societal blockers, there's logistics, there's, the kids and the cats and everything else. But when I came across you, and it was just such a simple formula that you presented, that our bodies can so simply help us to get to our goals, and that by shifting our nervous system into relaxed mode, we remove some of these blockers. And I love the high impact simplicity. There are a couple of tips that I picked up from you that I put into place immediately, and they were just so resoundingly helpful that I just had to get you onto the podcast. So thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. Well, it's funny you say that because I deal with the fallout of that resistance of, people thinking that they need to be something other than what they are in order to get what they want. And the kind of fallout from that on a physical level, on a mental level, which then stops them from getting to the place that they want to get to.
Yeah. Is that like the sum total of your work? I mean, I'm so happy to be chatting about burnout today. Is that the main thing that you do?
Yeah, so it's everything from burnout to peak performance. So generally the people that get into this burnout or this place of burnout are really driven, have, a real perfectionists and work really hard. They work themselves to the bone and they get to this place of burnout, but meanwhile, they were trying to get to the other end. If we look at on a spectrum, burnout's at one end, peak performance is on the other.
Yes.
And so, everything in between there, like stress, anxiety, depression, low moods, metabolic health, everything, hormonal health.
Yeah. Vesna, why do you think we're so driven for perfection? Why do we crave it so much? In the women that you work with, why do we crave it so much?
Well, back in, I don't know how many years ago now, when they first discovered burnout, they said there's a drive to prove your self-worth is an underlying driver for burnout.
No way.
Yeah. Yep. A desire to prove your worth. Because when you think about it, like what motivates your work, or what motivates you to work, through the night and not take care of yourself and live off caffeine or sugar or alcohol in order to get something done? Like, what's motivating that behavior? Because if you kind of step back and looked at it with, a clear mind and more perspective, it wouldn't make sense, because one, that wouldn't get you to where you want to get to, because you're just going to be frazzled. But then, really trying to dig, because I've worked with CEOs that can see that eventually. They're like, I think I'm just trying to prove to my family or the people around me, or, that I'm good enough.
Yes.
And people who are super successful in business, they feel the same insecurities.
Of course. It's so true. I mean, it's such a strong, I see evidence of it every day in the women that I work with, particularly the women I work with, not only the women, but particularly the women I work with. It is such a common thread, proving their self-worth. But for you to say that it actually, that's so closely related to burnout, that's just a nice little mind-blowing neat package, isn't it, really?
It is.
Oh, man.
And I think we don't realize what motivates our work, because we've built up over the years so many ideas about ourselves, and we've picked up so many beliefs along the way that we don't have a lot of awareness of what's driving us. Until we hit burnout, then we have lots of time to have lots of awareness, and we can really look at how we got to this place. She's a doctor in Greece, actually, and she wrote this book, The Gift of Burnout. And she talks about, like it's almost like the soul's way of withdrawing its energy from what you're doing in order for you to stop and course correct, because the direction that you're going is no longer the direction that you should be going, if that makes sense. Like it's almost like a reset point.
Okay.
It stops you to do the introspective work.
Yeah. So that sounds very full on. Like that sounds quite major, right? And I know that, having heard you before, burnout can look so minor that we can brush it off as quite normal. So what's the difference between being tired and burnout?
Yeah, so I think for a lot of people, they get used to that level of tiredness. They don't realize it kind of creeps up on them. They're always exhausted, but it's the exhaustion that's not relieved by sleep or by rest. So you have a good night's sleep, you still feel exhausted. You have a weekend off, come Monday morning, you're still tired. You go away on a holiday, you might get sick, and then you come back to work within the week or two, you're exhausted again.
Yeah.
So there's, the body's unable to recover and you're always tired.
Okay. So
what's really the key difference between tiredness and burnout? And plus, other things like this, changes in mood, either feeling anxious or agitated or irritable or even indifferent. Like people withdraw from being so engaged in their work or in their life, and they're just kind of like, whatever. There's this almost indifference. And thirdly, the big telltale sign is a loss of passion in your work or in your business. So I've had clients who have been in C-suite roles who've been like, I don't know what it is, but I think I just need a year off, right? And quit their jobs, and only to realize later it was burnout. And they could, if they had addressed the burnout, they could have still been in that role that they actually loved, but they stopped loving it, and they couldn't quite put their finger on why.
So can coming back from burnout help someone to love what they're doing again, or is it often associated with a pivot?
Well, it can be both, right? It could be pivoting the way that you do your current role. Maybe you're just giving it, you're sacrificing all of your boundaries and neglecting your self-care and taking care of yourself or your family, whatever it is, but kind of some kind of a course correct within that role, or it could be, another opportunity.
Okay. So doing the things that we need to get done to be effective, there's often a blurred line between, what's imperative and what's actually unhelpful in that perfectionist space. So how do you know that you're heading into burnout and that your coping mechanisms for meeting the daily needs are actually too much?
Yeah, so a lot of women say to me that they can't handle the work anymore. It's too high pressured, it's too stressful, they don't have that capacity, they don't have it in them. They're not a person that can deal with the stress, right? So it's fun. I smile when I'm saying that, because I hear that same conversation all the time.
Yeah.
And when they recover from burnout, they're actually expanding their business. They're taking more on. They're doing more, right? Because they didn't have the capacity before, because their head was full, their body's exhausted, and they can't see a way out except to leave.
But these are people who have previously been really high performing. So they've previously had that capacity, but now they don't. Correct.
But they forget. Forget that actually they handle things a lot better before, because we can only remember with where we're at now.
Yeah.
And so they're feeling the pain, they're feeling the struggle, they're feeling overstretched, overwhelmed, overtaken with everything. And it just feels like, well, it's the job or the business I need to get out in order to feel better, or I need to do something different, or I need to downsize, or I need to go part-time, or whatever it is, right? So it's this withdrawing from the work or the business to recover, where actually you don't need to do that. You need to take care of yourself and put steps in place in order to rebuild your personal well-being, to get back to being able to handle what's on your plate without feeling overwhelmed, and having the energy to get through the day, and having the resilience and the patience and the presence. Isn't
it extraordinary? I find it absolutely extraordinary that we can just self-sabotage so dramatically that we are so used to, I guess, this almost preset of being judged, that worry of being judged, and also of thinking that we are supposed to do it all ourselves, that it so infrequently occurs to us that there's something external going on. We just think we're supposed to fix it all ourselves.
Yeah. But I think, we even spoke on the phone when we first chatted about this idea of having to fix yourself. Like, there is a lot of that. I think that's where self-help or personal development has a bit of a dark side, because we think we're not where we want to be because there's something fundamentally wrong with us.
Yes.
So yeah, of course we need to learn skills along the way, but this idea that we need fixing and that we're the problem is really destructive and really draining.
For sure. I want to do a little happy dance now, because it's one of my biggest pet peeves with self-development is that it does feed people's insecurities. But your method is really different.
Yeah.
Really super different. Before I ask you what your strategy is for, some strategies for dealing with it, what's the impact of mental health? Because the impact on mental health, because I think that there's been a lot of what you've described, we've seen certainly a lot more prevalent since COVID. So while we've seen a more significant shift of mental health concerns, mental ill health, whether it's short-term, long-term, and we've seen burnout, at a similar increase at a similar time. So how do they relate? How does burnout and mental health, how do they relate?
Well, burnout can look like depression.
Yeah.
But it's treated very differently. So if someone has burnout, they feel these very low moods.
Yes.
And suffer a lot of anxiety. And they don't feel a lot of joy in the day-to-day experience. And so therefore, if they were to go to the doctor, they would be prescribed antidepressants. But that's not where the problem lies, right? There's, the body and mind needs a recovery from through multiple ways. But so that's kind of the biggest problem, is that it does get prescribed like that. If someone presents to the doctor with that, they will be prescribed. And look, if they need to, if they feel like they're not coping, that's obviously another thing. But it's not getting to the root cause. So it's not bringing the relief that they want to have, and it's not improving their quality of life. And at the end of the day, mental well-being is about us reaching our highest potential. It's not about the absence of anxiety or depression. It's about us being at the best versions of ourselves. Right. It's removing all those, things that hinder us or limit us. And so, burnout and depression look very similar, but are treated very, very differently.
That is so interesting. Because most people don't have access to a Vesna Hrsto. They will just, or haven't necessarily heard of you yet. And finding someone who you can rely on is tricky. So most people do just present to the local GP for the first line of attack. And then you've also got, I know you mentioned hormones as well earlier. Some of the things that you mentioned, some of those sort of signs of burnout, depression, some of those things also overlap with, perimenopause symptoms, which are all over the place at the moment. I've got my hand up. So it's such a tricky minefield to work out. And especially, and when we don't want to confront those issues anyway, we don't want to assume that it's something external. We think that we've just got to work harder. That's the solution. We're not working hard enough. So when we finally go, okay, maybe I do need to look elsewhere for some support with these issues. How does someone know where to go to find an answer?
Well, I always say to people, start with a GP checkup, get your pathology test done, right?
Okay.
Have a look at where the biochemistry sits, because obviously with burnout, we're going to get changes in hormones. Like stress hormones have an effect on all of our hormones. It can change our metabolic health, our insulin, our glucose, because we start to, and with perimenopause, as we get into that stage, the hormonal shift creates insulin resistance. We get more fat around the belly, which can also happen with burnout because of this excess stress hormones on the system. It eventually causes an impact on the metabolism and on insulin, right? So a lot of those things are really good to kind of get checked up. Thyroid function, which is really impacted by chronic stress. All of these things are important to look at to see what your baseline is, what you're dealing with, and what needs to be corrected. So I always recommend that, in all of my programs, we always look at people's pathology. We always recommend this is a list of what you need. and that we need to see, what's happening on the inside, what's the under the hood problems that we need to look at, and that are stopping you from feeling like your best, are stopping you from, reducing your productivity and your performance.
Yeah. And this is like regardless of the label thing, these are the issues we need to fix. Is that right?
Yeah. Like, I mean, everyone's going to be different. For some people, some people can be, heading into burnout and they may only have a few markers, and again, with pathology tests, it's one of these things that, it's everyone kind of falls in this suboptimal range, and there is actually an optimal range, which makes a huge difference to being in that range rather than suboptimal, which is not being detected. And so people kind of go through and can be feeling tired, stressed, anxious, depressed, gaining weight for up to 5 years, particularly women, without getting a proper diagnosis.
I want to talk about it. So, go away. Will it go away?
Yeah, of course.
Go away.
Yes, of course.
Okay. So it's not like just the way that it is now.
No, I think that's what we've been taught to accept.
Yeah.
Like, I have women say to me that are 35, that are like, oh, after 35, your body just changes and you just got to accept it. I'm like, that is not true.
Yeah.
That is just not true, because I see women in their 50s that look amazing.
Yeah, of course.
And it's not, it's no judgment on the person that doesn't feel amazing, but it's just that's the possibility. And I think we're just fed this line that, oh, you're getting older. Oh, you're a mum. You're in perimenopause. I forget it. That's how you're going to feel, and that's how you're going to look.
Yes. I have a GP who has his most common line is, "It's not that bad. You'll be okay. It's not that bad."
It's really not helpful, right? I mean,
no, it's not.
And I think they do the best that they can with the tools that they have.
Yeah, sure, that makes sense.
Yeah, and I just think, and it's a really, it kind of marginalizes where you're at, right? And you walk out of there feeling more frustrated and like, well, what now? Like, where's the hope? What do I do?
And it feeds that same cycle of, I must be the problem.
No. Yeah.
I must just have to work harder.
Yeah, it's interesting. I always say, like, if you've tried a lot of things and you haven't got the results, and working harder at it, doing the same thing is not going to get you anywhere. Like having a look at in a way that you could, or someone help you, is better to look at the bigger picture, to look at, well, what are your imbalances in your biochemistry? What are your imbalances in your belief systems and in your mindset? What are your imbalances in your life and in your work and your boundaries? Like, look at where these kind of leaks are happening in your life to be corrected.
Yes, and this is why I love the work that you do so much, because I think that without the biochemistry piece, I think that a lot of women in particular can brush off those other things. It's like, I'll get to it. And it's because we are so thoroughly distracted. There's not just one thing going on in our life. It's never just, what I'm dealing with in my life in 2024 is going to be health. That's it. I won't be dealing with my kids or my career or my extended family. I'm just going to deal with my health. We don't actually do any one thing in isolation. And so you can get so distracted dealing with other stuff, but the biochemistry is undeniable. You can't. I mean, that's a very clear line for yes, it's okay, or no, it's not, and there's a solution.
So in one of my programs we use when we work with clients privately, we use a glucose monitor, which is, you stick it on your arm and it detects your glucose 24/7.
Yeah.
So it has a look at how their body's responding to food, but also how their body's responding to stress. So we use that to identify their stress triggers as well, which, women come into the program and they're like, wow, I didn't know that I was getting that stressed in my business, right? And in different meetings and in different situations, but, they're not eating anything and their glucose is going up and up and up and up. And it's because when we're stressed, our body is breaking down muscle tissue to convert that into glucose. And so then we start to get this change in our biochemistry, but in our body shape.
Yeah.
We're losing muscle and we're replacing it with body fat. muscle is a really important indicator of health and longevity. We don't want to lose it as we get older. That's what happens as our hormones change. We lose muscle, but we want to gain muscle, retain muscle, prevent muscle loss. Yeah, it's really interesting. So yeah, the glucose monitor is fascinating because it brings the awareness back to the person of their body and where they're at, because there's no ignoring the signals that may come through, or an alarm, you know, if it's going up very high.
Yeah.
There's no ignoring that. There's no ignoring what you're putting into your body, because it's going to show up in a minute what's happening inside your body. And there's no ignoring the effects of stress, because it's there.
All right. So give me the worst picture. Where does it show up? I mean, it obviously shows up in your physical health career. Where does it show up? So if we ignore this, where does it show up?
Yeah, so it shows up, yes, in your physical health. You get more body fat. It starts to creates visceral fat, which creates more inflammation in the system, but it affects mental health. So glucose is the main fuel for the brain. We have insulin receptors in our brain, which monitor glucose. And so it starts to affect our mental health and our performance. So people get these highs and lows of energy, of mood, irritability, anxiety, right? And your performance, like they've just done so many studies where they've shown that people make different decisions when their glucose is really low, right? So it affects our decision making. It affects the way that how well we can perform at our work,
your performance
and at home, and whatever else we do.
Yeah. So what's the solution?
So, I think the first step is identifying and having awareness of where you're at. Like really checking in with yourself and asking yourself, like, do I feel amazing? Or do I feel like, I sometimes say to people, like, do you feel like you
question?
Yeah, do I feel amazing or do I not, right? And do I wake up tired? Do I get tired during the day? Do I have to live off caffeine to keep going? Do I need sugary foods to give me the buzz in the afternoon? Do I need alcohol at night just to unwind?
Yeah.
Am I sleeping okay? Am I feeling bloated or not? Am I digesting my foods? Am I handling stress, or am I losing it over little things? Am I carrying a lot of stress home with me and I can't let conversations go? I can't let something that was said in a meeting or whatever, I can't let that go. Like, is the mind nonstop busy replaying events, catastrophizing? Right. And so, if some of those, so really identifying where you're at. So really recognizing some of these things that you may see as normal as not actually optimal, right? They're common, but they're not natural, right? And then starting to put even just some little things in place that starts the recovery process. Like I always say to women, like, look at it like a recovery plan. Athletes have a recovery plan. They put themselves under an enormous amount of stress, physically, mentally, emotionally, right? Yet they're champions.
Yeah.
Due to their recovery plan.
Yeah.
Right. They have coaches, obviously, as well, that help them with all of that. But number one is sleep. I would say the power of 8 before 10, 8 hours of sleep, but getting in bed by 10 p.m.
Okay. Yep.
Because you want to align with your circadian rhythm.
Yeah.
The time when you're going to get deep sleep before midnight, which will do the repair work.
Yep.
Right. Your body does so much repair work while you're sleeping.
Yeah.
Detoxifies the brain. We process our emotions. Our body detoxifies. Our immune system is active, detecting things. Things are being repaired while we're sleeping. But if we're not getting that deep sleep time, that is not happening. Right. And so we can wake up feeling tired, still stressed, feeling groggy, whatever. Right. So in bed by 10, 8 hours of sleep. And the other place is like really paying attention to the food that you put on your plate. Are you waking up in the morning and going for the coffee, having caffeine for the first few hours after waking and not having anything to eat? Or are you having breakfast? So I recommend women breakfast within 20 minutes of waking. If you're feeling those symptoms of maybe heading into burnout or exhaustion or anxiety, breakfast within 20 minutes of waking in order to balance the stress hormones and the glucose in the morning.
This was a game changer for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, hugely. And
Mm.
I'm someone who would adamantly say, like for years, I've said, no, I actually don't like breakfast before like 11, 10 maybe, but I really can't stomach breakfast. So for me to find, for me to start doing that it was a game changer.
Yeah.
But I loved your explanation for it as well, because it wasn't just, it wasn't just that standard line of, oh, breakfast is the best meal of the day, most important meal of the day. It was actually not that. Your explanation for why is quite different. Can you elaborate on that?
So your hormones, your stress hormone levels peak in the morning. So they're the highest that they should be during the day. And so they wake us up and they get us going.
Yeah.
But if we're having caffeine in the morning and no food, our glucose level, well, that caffeine's going to cause our cortisol levels, our stress hormones, to go even higher. So we're going to maybe not feel it initially, but through the course of the day, we'll feel more stressed, anxious, and we'll have a lot more cravings. But it also affects our glucose levels. And so therefore, we've got this kind of up and down roller coaster for the rest of the day. And so it's really about nourishing the blood glucose and the cortisol levels in the morning, so they're balanced throughout the day. They're doing the normal response throughout the day, rather than high, then really low, and then you have some more coffee or some sugar because you feel really tired, and it goes back up and then it goes back down, and then it's just like that for the rest of the day. So it's really about correcting all of those kind of hormonal responses in order for you to have energy that's balanced throughout the day, to offset, anxiety, offset cravings, and also have you feeling really good.
Amazing. Amazing. So 8 before 10, breakfast within 20.
Yep.
And then I cut you off.
Yes. Okay. So
sorry.
That's okay. And then, look, I mean, there's more dietary things, but I guess the other part would be looking after gut health. So gut health is very much affected by chronic stress. We know that gut health and the microbiome is linked to mental health and mental well-being. And so a lot of the times with chronic stress, we don't tend to go for the best foods. There's more alcohol, caffeine, processed foods. The effect of cortisol just on the gut on its own causes an impact and causes a lot of inflammation in the system. And that inflammation inflames our brain, disrupting our mood, lowering our mood, creating anxiety, depression. Like it's linked to all of these mental health issues. And so the gut is also the way that we absorb our nutrition. So making sure that, something simple like removing processed foods and the best that you can, like removing the obvious stuff, right? The sugars, the biscuits or the chocolate or the soft drink and things like that would be a really good place to start. Because I think for a lot of people, when they're heading into burnout, they don't realize actually how much sugar they're having.
Yeah.
But it's used to prop them up for the rest of the day. So cutting that up, because that is a big disruptor of the microbiome, is the sugar. And the processed foods.
Amazing. Okay. Vesna, if somebody wants to take the step further and do some more exploration with you, what's the next step?
So we offer a couple of programs, but one of the bigger ones for women in business and leadership is the Peak Revival program. So that's where we work with people more closely. We look at their pathology. We use the glucose monitors. So a lot of deep dive into what their imbalances are, and then working with them to correct the nutrition and correct the deficiencies and the imbalances, but also working with them to reduce their stress triggers. So a lot of this mental stuff. So most of our stress is mental and emotional stress, even though it feels like it's just coming from our job, right? But a lot of it is going on in our head, and we need to look at, well, what are the beliefs or patterns that we hold that are actually seem very, very real to us that are causing us to feel extremely stressed.
I love this so much.
And so it's really a very holistic program. So I found through my work, through my own journey years ago, so simply changing someone's diet and giving them supplements was not enough. Okay. Because I saw this even in my practice many years ago. It's like I could see people were struggling with their work, with their lifestyles, with their family, the stress of it all, the pressure, the burden on their shoulders. And it was the stress that was creating more inflammation and more harm in their body than, you know, the caffeine or the sugar that they were eating, right? So diet is very important, but so is addressing the level of stress that's going on inside the body. And so that's really about having this kind of a mindset shift, or more of an awareness of what your triggers are, and kind of unraveling that for people.
I think that's why the work that you do is so powerful and so resonant, because in my little bubble in the world, I'm surrounded by people who have been on a path to correct their diet for stress and for physical and mental health. But they go in and invest thousands and thousands on, you know, the investigative work, and then these pills that they've got to take, like 40 pills a day, and like each meal they come out with a tackle box with, you know, like all the pills they've got to open up. And it's just the physical, and the taking of the tablets is so exhausting in itself that it's not sustainable. And it's just it's one part of their life in isolation, doesn't actually address the other stuff. So the fact that it's holistic, I think, is why it's so resonant.
Yeah, I found even in my practice many years ago, I remember I got to a point where we were always trained that if you're giving people more than 3 things at one time, you don't know what you're treating. Right? I always remember my lecturer saying that you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
And so, but then, you know,
that sounds like
the naturopathic model, or the health and wellness model, has become very much an allopathic model. Symptom, biochemical imbalance, treat it this way, right? Okay. And we're not seeing the whole person.
Yeah.
We're not seeing the person's life and the person's beliefs and what's or their joy or lack of joy, or you know. And when we look at, even on a biochemical level, you know, stress and stress hormones hijack the system.
Yeah.
So yes, there will be deficiencies and there will be imbalances, and you can do every investigative test under the sun, which is expensive, and you know, but at the end of the day, you need to treat the foundational things for the body to do its own correctional work, right? In order for your body to be at peak performance, your body's always striving to be at peak performance, right? It should be a natural state for us.
Yeah.
Okay. And so what we want to do is remove any blocks to that. We don't want to have someone taking 50 supplements and controlling their diet, so it's so stressful and it's not even enjoyable. Like, our body can correct most things. Yeah, a bit of, you know, had too much alcohol one day, or I've eaten sugar the next, whatever. Body can correct that. But when it's able to maintain homeostasis, and the biggest thing that disrupts that is stress hormones.
That's extraordinary, because I find it interesting when you were talking earlier about, you know, I had this question of, can stress and energy feel the same? Because, like, if we've had too much alcohol one day, you know that, you can see it, it's gone into your body. But when there's too much stress in your day, if we're not even noticing that there's too much stress, if we're just, you know, writing it off as adrenaline or, you know, high energy or something else, it's so easy to not see that.
Yeah, like I often say that, you know, when you've got gut breakdown and inflammation in the system, it inflames your brain. It's like going to work drunk, but you don't realize it because you're so used to it.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's you know, and so people get used to still performing at a higher level with all of that going on, but they could, you know, I had a client say to me once, I'd be at 100% if it wasn't for this anxiety, or actually she's way above that afterwards. Wow. She wasn't at 95%, which she thought she was before. But so they get used to operating at that level, but actually there's quite a big gap to where they could be their best, but they are used to getting stuff done at that from that place.
Yeah.
You know? But they could actually have a lot more in terms of productivity and performance if they didn't have all that inflammation in their system, all that stress, right?
Amazing. Vesna, you've the next step, if somebody wants to move further, you've very kindly sent a freebie over to me. So I will attach that in the podcast notes. So if someone wants to just click on the little doobie below the podcast, they'll be able to access this freebie. Do you want to tell us about it?
Yeah, so the kit gives you an assessment tool, so some questions to kind of help you identify where you are along the kind of burnout peak performance spectrum. Even some pathology tests that we look at, how you can even order them online yourself. And then what are the kind of 3 key areas to look at to address whether you're in burnout, heading towards burnout, or how to get to peak performance.
Amazing. Amazing. Vesna, thank you so much. I'm sure that there'll be a flood of people coming your way as a result of this conversation. I know that the advice that I've had from you has just been, as I say, it's been game changing. So I'm so grateful that you've shared your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You know, I believe that women do help other women. I hope that this episode has empowered you to question your willingness to go last. I hope that you will embrace balance, and I'm also hoping that you will help me to help other women to do the same. So how can you help? Show your support for the work. Subscribe and review the podcast here where you're listening. Follow the Goddess of Balance on Instagram to catch some cheeky behind the scenes and extras. Connect with me on LinkedIn and share the posts with your network. That would be sensational. If you have enjoyed this program, this episode, you will no doubt love my group coaching program. You got to find all the links to these in the little written blurb for this episode. Thank you, my friend, for normalising balance with me. We are raising performance and reputations, wellness and equality. Together, we're creating positive change for working women, starting with you. Sincerely, I thank you for being part of the movement.